I think customers appreciate that. It's actually a water quality person that will actually ring them back. You know, they've sort of got understanding of the testing they're doing and everything.
Hi there, Joel Hufford with another Portsmouth Water podcast. Today we're talking about water quality, and in a nutshell, it's everything that Portsmouth Water does to make sure that your drinking water is top quality 365 days a year, including a mind-boggling 100,000 tests conducted to make sure everything's okay each year. Right, it's time to have some fun. Talk water quality. First of all, some introductions. Carol, just start with you in terms of what your job is at Portsmouth Water.
Hi, I'm Carol. I'm the head of water quality, so responsible for making sure that the water is safe to drink for everybody.
Fantastic. And Emma, your role?
Yeah, so I'm Emma and I'm the water quality manager, and I look after the laboratory and the sampling teams, so make sure that we're doing all the tests that we need to and make sure we're complying with the regulations.
And Emma, if I kick off with you, what do we mean by water quality? Because people may think water is water, so how do you measure different water quality?
Water obviously comes from a lot of different sources, the rain and rivers and stuff like that, but 95% of our sources are actually coming from aquifers, which are under the South Downs. So they filter through the chalk, and that's what we pull up in terms of the water. So our water is naturally really hard. It's a hard water source. And that means that people might get limescale or sea limescale in their products, which is a really common issue. But it's also got loads of really great minerals. So lots of calcium, lots of magnesium, which is really good for your health. So, you know, it's really good quality water, which means we don't have to treat it much. But it is hard water. So that's probably what people notice the most about the water in our area.
And you mentioned, obviously, it goes through chalk, so it picks up a lot of minerals that results in limescale.
Yeah.
And typically, how does that show itself? What will people notice in terms of limescale affecting different appliances in their home?
So obviously the big one is kettles and seeing white chalky stuff in the bottom of the kettles. So that's just limescale. It's not harmful. It's just those minerals dropping out of solution. And they also might notice it on tea. So sometimes people see like an oil on the top of their tea, and that's just the minerals. It's just coming out of solution and reacting and producing a little shiny oil on the top of cups of tea.
And if someone were to be fortunate enough to move from, let's say, the north of England down to Portsmouth, would they notice a difference in the taste of water?
100%. So the north has quite a lot of soft water sources. And so obviously it's hard water, which is probably the main difference, but it obviously probably tastes a bit crisper as well.
And across the Portsmouth Water patch, which is from West Sussex over in the east, right across it over into Hampshire, and north from southern Hampshire up towards the Downs. Does it taste pretty much the same right across the patch, no matter where you draw the water from?
Yeah, we're really lucky in that a lot of our sources, the chemistry of it is very stable because it's all generally from aquifers under the South Downs. So actually, you know, the hardness doesn't really change, the pH doesn't really change. So we're really lucky in that respect, and that means it gives us quite a lot of resilience as well, because we can move water around without having to worry about, you know, what customers, if they might see an impact to that.
Yeah, because even our one river source we have is a chalk stream. So it's, again, same constitution, same chemicals, same sort of like taste and everything. So.
And Carol, you mentioned at the start in the introduction that you're basically in charge of making sure that water that reaches customers' homes is safe to drink. Mm-hmm. What are the rules and regulations in the UK around drinking water, and how does that feed into your day-to-day job?
We're regulated by the Drinking Water Inspectorate, who have a number of regulations that we need to adhere to. So everything from one of my teams looks at the risks that come from can get in the water. So we've got one team looking at that, and then the idea is that we know how to treat it and mitigate any risks that we may have from the catchment and sort of the source water. And then obviously we test it and everything to make sure it's safe and everything. We have to report to them on a monthly basis. We have to report to them in the year. We have to report certain things at certain times. As I say, we have regular meetings with our regulator as well to make sure that we're adhering to those regulations. They can literally turn up tomorrow and audit us if we need to. So we always are, make sure that we're working towards and making sure we're always compliant with those regulations. Main driver for our team is obviously all the testing and, looking for risks and everything and make sure everything's all right from that perspective. I've seen a real tightening in regulations over the last sort of 10 years. And it's really had an impact on our workload from the prospect of, you can't investigate something and just sort of like, you have to really investigate to get to the root cause of why something might have happened and things like that, and what they expect of you for evidence, even from training of staff through to record keeping. A lot of that's the heightened. It's really got quite strict as to how we have to adhere to the regulations.
What sort of things do the regulations cover? Is it a small document?
No,
Is there lots of
no.
detail you have to comply with?
Oh God, you're going to test me now. So there's in excess of 35 regulations, and that's everything from the water needs to be wholesome, how often we should sample somewhere, what tests we should look for, the fact that we have to do risk assessments on our source waters and our treatment processes, everything to reservoirs, how we treat and sample reservoirs. We even down to if we find lead in people's properties, we've got to take the lead out our side, and we encourage people to take lead out their side. There's how much chlorine levels we should be putting in, the fact we should disinfect our water. Just go on and on and on. But there's a number of them.
And what are the consequences if you're not complying with those regulations?
They can go everything from making a suggestion to you as to how you should improve things to enforcement, so which is when they give you a legal notice or legal instrument to improve what's gone wrong, or how to prevent it happening again if something's happened, to final prosecution at the end of the day. If you don't adhere to those regulations, you can appear in court and the company would be prosecuted. So obviously we do everything in our, by adhering to those regulations, you can avoid that. But we like to think we've got a good relationship with our regulator and we're quite open and honest with them. So, so we do have notices for improvement. I don't think there's a water company out there that doesn't have them. But that's their way of regulating us and making sure that we do actually sort of like do what we say we're going to do and things like that. So,
talk to me about the testing that you mentioned.
Okay.
So how, at what point in the water's journey from being sucked out the ground in the South Downs to ending up at Mrs. Miggins' tap when she's filling up a glass for a glass of water, where do you test it and how often do you test it?
Right, so it varies. So starting at the raw water, so the borehole or the river or the springs, we will test the raw water, and that isn't defined in the regulations how often you should do it, but you do it to determine what your water type is like and how you need to treat it. So we set that internally as to how often we sample that. But then you have to, so the regulator kicks in at treatment works. It says you have to do, depends on how much volume the treatment works produces, depends on the frequency. So some of our sites are 365, so which means we are sampling them every day of the year, Christmas Day, everything. Then, so from the treatment works, you then go on to the reservoirs. These are concrete storage reservoirs, so not open reservoirs. So where we store the water before it goes to customers' taps.
And that's water that's already been treated?
Treated, yep. And so we have to do that weekly. So that's the only one that's defined weekly. The other one depends on how much volume you produce. And then finally at customers' taps, and depending on our area is split into what we call water quality supply zones, and they can't be larger than 100,000 people. And then within that, you have to do so many samples per. And so the larger the population, the larger the number of samples. I think our highest is 4 to 5 a week. So sort of Monday to Friday, we're sampling them every day in some of our zones. So yes, that's right up. So right from the raw water right up to customers' tap. So
over the course of a year, how many tests are we talking about?
Oh, I'll hand over to Emma there.
So we test over 100,000 samples, 100,000 tests a year, and that's for a number of parameters. So Carol spoke about the regulations, and the regulations cover a wide range of tests. So there's stuff like microbiological tests, so E. coli, coliforms, Clostridia. So we want to make sure there's none of that in the water. So thankfully, all of our results are normally 0. And then we test other stuff like chemistry. So we check the pH, we check the nitrate, phosphate and stuff like that to make sure, again, that we're adhering to the regulations. And physical stuff. So pH, as we said previously, the pH doesn't really change, same with hardness levels.
That's whether the water is acidic or otherwise.
Exactly. So, and we use that to help inform our treatment decisions as well. So it all links up. And turbidity. So turbidity is something that we look at as a aesthetic visual thing. So
is that whether the water's got bits in it, essentially.
Exactly, yeah. So turbidity is a test for particulates, and we want to, the regulations are very low, so we've got turbidity tests that we do, and obviously we don't want the water to look like that. Very cloudy, could be full of particulates, and the limit that we work to is that.
So it's very clear.
Very clear with no particles in. So that's one of the really common tests that we do. They're all tested in our accredited laboratory here on head office site. So we're accredited to ISO 17025 and monitored and audited by an independent body called UCAS. Not the school UCAS, which everybody gets confused with, but they're an accreditation body for the UK.
So essentially what you're saying is, although you do your own testing, it's independently checked to make sure it's all above board, you're doing it right, and that the results are as you say they are.
Yeah, and that all gets sent to the DWI, as Carol mentioned, on a monthly basis.
So DWI is Drinking Water Inspectorate.
Yeah.
And in terms of customers getting some reassurance around how you're performing, out of those 100,000 tests you're conducting each year, do you pass all of them?
We don't pass all of them, but we have a very, very small number of failures where we don't meet the regulations. Quite common failure is a coliform failure, which is an indication of there's bacteria in the water. So in that situation, we would go back to the property, retest it, test the neighbouring properties, go up and downstream and try and find the source of the failure. Kind of generally speaking, all of those times, it's down to tap hygiene, and so that could be filters that are fitted to the tap, it could be little aeration devices that are on the end of the tap where people like to make it all kind of like a fountain, or weird attachments, hoses attached, or it could be plumbing where they've got dead ends and it's a bit of a higgledy-piggledy plumbing situation in the house, and so they've got those dead ends which is allowing bacteria to grow.
And the reason we know that is we will often take a sample in the house from a different tap in the property, because it's often around the sink. So, I mean, we try and all keep our sinks clean, but, you know, things do, you wash things in the sink, you know, clean your saucepans and things like that. So, yeah, they can get dirty.
So you mentioned E. coli, and that may bring to mind for some customers the incident there was a period of time ago, it might have been last year, down in the southwest, where there are a lot of customers that were affected by E. coli getting into the water supply when it shouldn't have done. I think there was a pipe that had a valve in it that was in a cow field. Cow muck got into the pipe and it contaminated water that was meant to be treated and clean and ready for customers. Yeah. In terms of anything like that, has anything like that happened on your watch in the Portsmouth Water area?
No, so that was Cryptosporidium, and obviously with that comes a lot of other bacteria. But no, so all of our sites where so as Carol mentioned, we do risk assessments, and part of that is to look at the risk of Cryptosporidium. We've looked at all of that for all our raw waters, so we understand our crypto risks, and where we have identified crypto risks, we have treatment in place. So we treat the water depending on the raw water that we find, and that could be filtration, so physically filtering out that Cryptosporidium. It could be using UV, which denatures the DNA in it and stops it reproducing. So, yeah, we've looked at all of that, and thankfully we've not had any kind of event or issue like that.
No. And what we have at our treatment works is quite tight limits. So all the treatment works have got to work within certain parameters. So we add chlorine to the water to kill sort of bacteria and everything. So we have shutdowns on our treatment work. So they will shut down if the chlorine isn't at the right level. And that can be too high as well, because customers don't like too much chlorine either. So, but generally we'd be shutting down on low. Unfortunately for us, we have treated water service reservoirs, but most of our customers are served from, and normally one or two treatment works are going into that reservoir. So we'd rather shut the site down and obviously deal with any risk or anything that we've found is a problem before we then obviously put that treatment work back in. But customers will still get water because we've got other treatment works going into those reservoirs to provide them with the water.
What are the other things about drinking water that customers may have concerns about? Because I guess typically you're using your range of senses. Does the water smell different, look different, taste different? Is that basically what people get concerns about?
Yeah, so I think, as you already mentioned, when people move to the area, probably the biggest thing is the hardness and the lime scale. But also when moving into a new property, probably one of the common complaints that we get is chlorine, or my water tastes like chlorine, or chemically, or like TCP. It's a really common problem, but it's really easy for us to solve. So the chlorine, if you boil it, it's really volatile, so it'll evaporate off and you won't be able to smell it anymore. If you boil it and if you notice it in like a cup of tea or a coffee, that's not chlorine, it's something called chlorophenol. And that's where the chlorine has reacted with some plastic and it's created this chlorophenol compound. It's not harmful, but it's just way more persistent. So it will give that smell of chlorine and TCP. So really easy test is if you're picking it up in your boiled water, it's chlorophenol, not chlorine. And we supply for free non-return valves or double check valves, which, because it's normally like a plastic hose from a dishwasher or a washing machine, you fit that on the end and it will just stop the water from coming back after it's sat in that plastic pipe. So really easy fix, but probably one of our most common complaints. Yeah. And then the other one is air. So again, especially in the hot weather, water can become quite aerated because it's warmer, there's more air in the system. And so a really easy test for that, if your water is looking a bit cloudy or more so than normal, a bit different. If it's clearing from the bottom up, so obviously if it's white to start with and then as it clears, the white is moving to the top, that's just air. And again, it's not harmful, but it can be more noticeable in the warm weather.
And if anyone's got any concerns, what should they do? Is it just contact Portsmouth Water in the normal way, email or phone or whatever works best?
Yeah. So they can either phone us or we have a form on the website which they can literally fill in, describe what they're concerned about, whether it's taste, odour, the appearance of it or something else, like lead. So if a customer has moved to a property and found lead pipes, we offer lead checks for free because it's a big issue and people shouldn't have lead pipes, but it's a historic issue again. So we offer free lead checks, get the lead checked, find out what the levels are, and then again we can advise, send our water fittings team out, and then if we've got lead our side, we'll replace that. But we would always recommend that they replace theirs.
They will always, Emma's quite right, they phone in or leave a message on or fill out our web form. It's actually a water quality person that will actually ring them back. So it's one of our team that will actually ring them back. So they've sort of got understanding of the testing they're doing and everything. So I think customers appreciate that rather than, they're talking to somebody who understands the fact we are doing the testing and what it's all about. Yeah.
So, Carol, just to come back to the conversation we were having about regulation, you mentioned the Drinking Water Inspectorate, these 35 regulations that are in place to make sure everything's as it should be, how you work to assure yourselves and assure the outside world, customers and regulators that you're complying with everything and the water's fit to drink. How have customer expectations and regulations changed in recent years and how has that affected what you do and what you have to check for?
I think definitely regulations have got tighter. I say the expectation of what we've got to provide the regulator to prove what we're doing has definitely increased. So there's a lot more pressure on the team. The labs never used to have to be accredited, as an example, whereas they have to be now. They have been for quite a few years, but talking a few years ago, it was like you didn't have to. So that's about confidence in results, isn't it? I would say social media has had a real impact on confidence in water quality as well. So not so much from the regulator, but you hear of one thing happening and it spreads really quickly. There's a lot of like these home test kits that you can buy on Amazon and things like that, which aren't really any good. But obviously people see that, they panic and they think, so I think confidence in water is quite low at the moment. We always say we'd love to educate every customer as to exactly, I don't think people appreciate what we actually do to make sure that water is safe. Why should they? I mean, they expect to turn their tap on in the morning, they expect to take, to get a glass of water, don't they, and use water. But and the other one I would say that's been a challenge for us is we call them emerging contaminants. So the latest one is PFAS with they call them forever chemicals. So PFAS is used in coatings in frying pans and firefighting foam and waterproof jackets and things. And unfortunately, they don't break down in the environment. So new things that are coming out that may be a health risk in the future, I would say is another sort of like change of the regulations that we're seeing. And again, people see more, it's easy to get hold of information on the internet and everything. And while some of it's correct, a lot of it isn't incorrect, and there's scaremongering out there. So for me, it's the confidence in water that's been the biggest impact for us as an industry, I think, as well. With something like PFAS, there's no real health limit yet. We have to measure to one level, United States measure to a different, Europe, even within Europe, the different countries all measure different levels. So we test for PFAS. We're very fortunate that we don't have any real issue with PFAS in our water at this moment in time. And so, but if we did, what the regulator's done is they've set guidance limits. Coming back to where our water comes from, we are very lucky. The South Downs is an excellent source of water. So that's, makes it fortunate for us, but yeah.
And Emma, kind of closing question for you, just to cover off, if something goes wrong in the Portsmouth Water operations, you might have a burst water main pipe that's got to shut off the water, get it fixed and put customers back on supply. It might be that all of the testing you do identifies an issue and you've got to deal with that. Can you just talk about in those scenarios how you identify the problem, sort it, and then check that everything's okay and customers can go back to having supplies in the normal way?
We have emergency plans for every kind of scenario that we can think of. But if I start with like a network burst, as we've said previously, we're very fortunate in that we can move water quite easily, and it's all very similar in nature. If we have bursts, we're very quick. We have a brilliant network team who go out and rezone it, so turn valves where they can to isolate the burst, and then put everyone on a different supply of water. Mm-hmm. And then they will go about fixing that burst. And then once that burst is fixed, we will go and take samples. So we have a sampling team who just drop everything and go out, take a load of samples. And then once that's all good, they will rezone it all back, and then everyone will be back in their normal supply. And then other scenarios where we've got issues at treatment works. So if we do identify an issue, normally, as Carol mentioned, we have a lot of control measures, belts and braces on all the different aspects of that. So automatic shutdowns. So if the chlorine is too high or too low, as Carol mentioned, the site will shut off. And then that gives us time, again, because of the way our network works, we've got time to investigate that and hopefully rectify that quite quickly, and then put it back into supply once we've taken a load more samples, a load more tests, and then again back into supply. And
as you mentioned earlier, Portsmouth Water's track record is pretty good in this regard.
Yeah, we've got very good, excellent source water. So, yeah.
Right. So we mentioned the 100,000 tests that are done to measure water quality across the year. Can we just clarify, is that 100,000 tests, which includes machines doing automatic tests at the treatment works, plus somebody going out, taking a sample, putting it in a test tube, bringing it back to the labs here at PWHQ, it getting tested, or is it more than that?
The 100,000 is physical tests being done in our laboratory. We have a number of, I think we've got over 300 online monitors on our site.
So that's automatic machines?
Automatic machines. They're in line, so they're in part of the treatment process on the raw waters, once we've dosed chlorine. And yeah, they will be always doing a test. So that's automatically just testing. And then that all goes back to our, we have a big kind of telemetry system, which is monitored by the production teams, water quality.
So that's someone with a big computer screen, and if there's a problem, presumably it flashes up red.
But what we also do, because they're online monitors, and they say that there's water going through them all the time to measure the parameter, chlorine, whatever, the lab actually we compare those results with the lab results to make sure that they're, again, like we're checked by an accredited body, we checking those instruments as well. So because if those instruments are being used to shut our site down, we want to make sure they're working as well. So the lab takes samples from those monitors and we check them in the lab and we verify that they're giving the right reading as well. So that's another check that's in place.
And then on top of that automatic machine-based checking, there's 100,000 samples that are physically taken, put in a little Portsmouth Water van and driven back to the labs to be tested for different parameters to make sure they're all in line with everything.
Yeah, and our samplers as well do in situ tests at customer properties. So they have little handheld kits like this, and they check the chlorine at the customer's property. So this measures the colour. So we take a little sample of water from the customer's tap, add some reagents to create a colour change, and then this monitors the chlorine level based on that colour change. So we have the samplers going out doing tests as well on chlorine temperature and stuff, and hardness as well. So they check the hardness to make sure that we've got hard water and that the water is representative of our water. Because if someone's got a softener, we don't want to sample that because that's not the representative water supplied to the customer. So we might take an operational sample so we can check and advise the customer if there's any issues with that system. But for our compliance regulatory monitoring, we need to make sure that that water is representative of the water being supplied to the rest of that zone. So that's why they carry hardness strips as well, just to check that the water is our water.
And how many people are in your sampling team? If you've got 100,000 tests to do a year, that sounds like a lot of people and quite a few vans.
Yeah, so we've got a team of 6 at the moment, and they will go out every day of the year, and they will take from each location, they will take a number of bottles, and then those bottles will go back to the laboratory and will be tested for a different number of things.
Thank you very much.